Welcome back to another edition of Let's Argue, the show where I respond to your hot takes, unpopular opinions, and tough questions. You can post them here in the comments or on Twitter whenever I ask. The actual recording process will be streamed live on Twitch. That's where I respond to that shit, and then you can watch it here on YouTube, and it's awesome. Hope you enjoy.
Darius says, The Last of Us movie game bad. I realize this is a little bit of a troll. You're trying to rile me up a little bit. Again, this super fucking anecdotal, dumb discourse shit, where you may have seen this. Again, I hate sort of talking about nebulous groups of people in my bubble that I see on my timeline or whatever. It's one of the silliest things to do and get upset about. I hate to be that guy, but I have to be that guy right now, I'm sorry. I hate all the Japan gamers. Their favorite thing to do is doing the low-effort dunks on Sony games for being movies. And then they see the exact same design choices in, like, FF7R or something, and they're like, oh, so true. I was going in on this on Twitter myself earlier, and I think The Last of Us 1 specifically, right? One of the coolest things in a game, to me, still is the way you start playing as Sarah, Joel's daughter. You get into this car accident, and then the perspective switches to Joel. He's carrying her in his arms. And then, later stuff happens, and then Joel's by himself, and then you play him for the rest of the game, right? And then at the very end of the game, you get to the hospital, you save Ellie, you carry her in your arms, take her out of the hospital, take her with you in your car, drive to the forest, she wakes up, and then you take back control of Ellie. And it's this perfect little loop, with the way the story starts and closes out, this mirror situation, where it beautifully and wordlessly communicates, like, a theme and a visual motif, right? In a way that is actually impossible in a movie. It seems like such a simple thing, that it's so simple that it may not even have occurred to you that this is happening in the game, right? That this is a valid sort of reading of the game. And it's like, how the fuck would you even do this in a movie? You can't. Like, you can't communicate. You could like envision a film where it's following this one character now primarily, and then it's following this other character primarily, but that doesn't really make intuitive sense the way just taking control of the character does as the player with your fucking hands, right? So the accusation that these games are purely movie envy and Oscar bait and all that shit is just so fucking stupid. If you play them for 5 seconds, you know that there's clearly some kind of understanding going on for trying to express things with games, with mechanics, with the form, with structure, with perspective. And I guess I do wonder if maybe the secret sauce was having... I hate auteur worship, but having Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley as a team, maybe Bruce Straley to rein in Druckmann a little bit, because in Last of Us 2, that game was entirely directed by Druckmann, and I feel like that game has a much more awkward handle on this exact thing, where, again, it tries to express things through interactivity and, like, perspective and all that shit, and just, it feels much more forced, much more awkward. I just get really annoyed at the movie game accusations, or at the movie game dunks, because it's clearly not done in an effort to actually say anything constructive of the games. It's done to perpetuate a narrative and to do some form of a fucking gaming culture war. Ashes, I think that is a fair take, actually. That was a fair observation. It's not quite as clean. But then, again, I mean, that section in itself is really cool, so... Like, that is another example, though, right, of a thing where I think if you did the same thing in a movie, the idea of, oh my god, what happened to Joel? Again, to be clear, Joel is injured, and then the next thing you do is you play as Ellie for a little bit, and you're like, oh my god, what the fuck happened? She's, like, hunting on her own, what the fuck is happening? If you cut to that in a film, I feel like the sense of, oh my god, what happened to Joel, wouldn't be as palpable. That it's not something that would occur to you like that, because in a movie it's very normal to cut away to switch to a different character, you know? That inherently doesn't carry as much weight as it does in a game. So doing this in a game, I think, the way they communicated it, the way they paced it, shows, I think, a pretty deft hand with that sort of thing. And you see it all over The Last of Us 1. You see it all over the fucking game. Again, the one reveal, I don't want to spoil it, but I'm gonna say the animals, right? Or the final encounter with, you know, at the end of the hospital section, the final, you know what I'm talking about, right? There was a part where they had it as a cutscene at first, and then they were like, what if we made this interactive, actually? And it's purely mechanical. It's just using the same, just exact verbs, the exact same controls as the rest of the game. And I think that was a really bold choice to do it that way, and that, clearly that moment upset a lot of people. And I think that shows that, I mean, that necessarily doesn't show anything, right? But I think just having that sensibility puts it above just being a fucking movie. Just a movie envy fucking game. Acquisitive asks, video game players' expectations for stories are so low because they rarely experience other mediums. Also, video games often don't elevate storytelling, with it mostly getting in the way. You can count the good examples on one hand. I'm careful with these kinds of takes, personally. First and foremost, I subscribe to the idea that, okay, what a good story even is kind of dependent on the medium in the first place, right? When we're talking about shit like Gurren Lagann, for example, that's obviously pretty lowbrow entertainment, but it's expressing a feeling and a belief so strongly and so well, in such an infectious way, that I would call that a very successful story. The wording, good story, is something that I kind of have an issue with in general. We should use the words good and bad a little less, I think, in general. People who play games for stories have lower standards for stories than people who play them for the gameplay and who get their narratives from other mediums. That is a dark Zia take. That is something in my heart I do believe, but I've never said this out loud. When I think about stories that are praised in games a lot of the time, like, this is not shitting on anyone who, like, loves this game or whatever. This is not shitting on the game either itself, right? But something like Final Fantasy XIV. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure it has great elements. But to me, it's the premise of a game that's this long, where most of the presentation is two characters statically talking to each other, right? For hours and hours and hours, is a little questionable. To hold that up as a great story, I think, is a little suspect. Again, I want to be really careful when talking about the type of person, for example, who really loves something like Final Fantasy XIV. I don't want to make assumptions about them. I don't want to say, oh my god, they probably don't watch movies. But I do think when you see what is happening in film with shit like Poor Things, for example, again, sort of, such a cursed comparison, but like, sort of gives me a similar sense to Gurren Lagann, where it expresses its worldview so emphatically that I got so swept up in it, and it's so beautiful, and just clears every video game, right? And then the same director, a couple months later, will something insane like Kinds of Kindness, where it just goes to places that in films are very, very common and very relevant to the human experience that you just never see in games. I can't shake this feeling that reality is just not really sort of top of mind in games discourse, right? That there is so much other shit out there. I think once you realize, okay, I can get a great, full experience, life-altering experience, right? Something that I think about as I go about my day in 90 minutes, in the span of 90 minutes. The element of time to me is so crucial in this. Games just waste so much fucking time. I mean, that's a whole topic onto itself, right? How much meaningful gameplay can you cram into a really short experience? I think Alien Soldier proves that you can have a game that's really deep, has varied situations, explores the potential of its mechanics to a very satisfying degree in a 40-minute runtime. And then you could imagine a version of that game that also, at the same time, somehow conveys a theme or a story or whatever. I think generally the idea of conveyance, I like the word conveyance. Dark Souls is a game that I've talked about a lot with my friends, that the central theme of the game that I would identify is perseverance, right? That it uses these metaphors of fire and dark, and the fire going out is sort of representative of humanity, and just this visual interplay, the sense of isolation that you feel when you're on this journey. It's a lot of things communicated very wordlessly in a way that lends itself really nicely to games. And trying to compare that to a film, I think, is stupid and not that super productive. I think, for my sensibility, for a game, that is the ideal type of story. And I wish that's something we talked more about than, oh my god, Final Fantasy XIV. I don't even know what's supposed to be so good with Final Fantasy XIV, right? I haven't really seen people go into a lot of detail about it, and I guess maybe it's hard to talk about when the game is so fucking long and, like, you don't want to spoil it. I think Nier Automata is a game that I, in retrospect, appreciate a lot. Like, that game has a deep sense of maturity in its themes, and the way it expresses those. Chili says, sometimes playing a game only once can give you a clearer idea of a game's flaws compared to those in too deep who try to defend every issue, missing the forest for the trees. This is semi-related, but I can't help but think of the opposite scenario where it's like a guy playing a game for 300 hours and be like, this fucking sucks. Y'all know the, what was the Dragon Guard 3 thing where the review is a thumbs down and then the first line of the review is, this is one of my favorite games. Was it Dragon Guard 3? I don't remember. Obviously, this is kind of an anecdotal take, but it is something that psychologically I'm just very interested in. We often debate about what is the correct way to judge a game. Is replay value something you should consider? Is it fair to slag off a game for losing steam on repeat playthroughs, for not holding up as well in repeat playthroughs, for being this mostly experiential thing that is fun the first time? That is definitely one sort of avenue where I see that idea kind of expressed a lot. Now, personally, honestly, I think on the take that you're expressing here, Chili, I think I want to push back on that a little bit, because this is something that Matthew Matosis has sort of talked about in his Beautiful Joe commentary, where he says that subsequent fairness is more important than initial fairness. It's more important that the game holds up over time, again, on repeat playthroughs, as you inspect it more, necessarily than the first time. That's something he values more. And then you could extrapolate the same idea to just the game as a whole. Bayonetta, classic example. The QTEs and all that shit. Insanely off-putting on the first playthrough, surely, right? But actually an insanely small percentage of the entire experience once you really get down to it, right? Once you're honest with yourself and once you look at the entirety of what the game is doing, that is such a fucking blip in that cosmos that it's, to me, as someone who... You know what, maybe I'm reacting to this strongly because I am that guy with a game like Bayonetta, right? To me, it seems really silly to get hung up on the QTs. I don't take that seriously. You are basically saying, yeah, I'm the type of person who is into deep. But I don't think that's true. I think because I stuck around with the game, and because I learned to recognize the petty grievances for what they are, I think I have a little more authority over what the priorities of the game are. And I think that is a fair perspective. That is... I'm not necessarily going to say that judging it based on your first poor playthrough is invalid. I'm not going to say that. But then, in turn, I'm also not going to say that me just getting too used to all this shit is invalid either. So, that's where I stand.
That was Let's Argue. Hope you enjoyed. Again, any comments under this video will be eligible for the next episode of Let's Argue, which I will once again record on twitch.tv/Ziadbro. Follow me there to get notified whenever I stream. It's a fun time. It's a great time. You should watch. Thank you.